Today, perhaps more than ever, women are being led to believe that when their bodies go quiet, when desire fades, when touch no longer calls, something must be wrong. They fear it means they're losing value, losing femininity, losing connection. But what if the silence is not a sign of decay, but of emergence? What if that stillness is not absence, but presence? Not emptiness, but alignment? What if what feels like withdrawal is actually the first breath of becoming? Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." When the noise of the external world fades, when validation no longer distracts, when attention no longer excites, the soul begins to rise, often through discomfort. The parts of a woman she once repressed, the intuition, the knowing, the instinct, finally find room to breathe. When a woman stops playing the game of being desired and starts watching her own silence, something ancient stirs. A presence long buried beneath compromise and performance begins to whisper. Not to be chosen, but to choose. Not to seduce, but to see. Not to chase, but to remember. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, the meeting between the self she presents and the truth she hides. And often, this meeting comes in the quiet, in the abstinence, in the space where she no longer searches for another and begins listening for herself. Have you ever wondered why so many women, after stepping away from constant stimulation, suddenly begin to dream more vividly, feel more deeply, sense more clearly? It's not a breakdown. It's not detachment. It's not failure. It's a beginning. It's the soul speaking at last. Part 1. Posing the paradox. Silence is not emptiness. We live in a world obsessed with volume, of voices, of attention, of stimulation. Silence, especially the kind that comes from within, is often feared or misunderstood. When a woman stops seeking affection, when her sensuality quiets, when her presence no longer plays to the rhythm of desire, others begin to wonder, what happened to her? And worse, she begins to wonder the same. But Carl Jung reminded us that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. What if the silence we dread is not a disappearance, but a confrontation with the self we've long abandoned? The modern woman is taught that to be desirable is to be alive. She is conditioned to measure her value by the attention she receives, the affection she attracts, the emotional feedback loop that reassures her she is still visible, still valid. In the absence of that loop, many women feel as though they've disappeared, not just from others, but from themselves. This is the great deception, because when the body falls silent, something else awakens. Jung believed that the unconscious speaks in symbols, dreams, and patterns. It rarely shouts, it whispers. And most often, it waits for silence to make itself known. Have you noticed how the stillest moments often bring the deepest clarity? How, when you're no longer distracted by longing or performance, your inner voice gets louder, not with noise, but with truth. That is not emptiness, that is entry. Entry into a space deeper than desire, a space untouched by validation, a space where the soul lives not in reaction, but in presence. This space can feel foreign at first. Jung described the path to self-awareness as a descent before it becomes an ascent. The descent into ourselves, the confrontation with what we've suppressed, ignored, or traded away, begins most often not in loud awakenings, but in quiet collapses. You may feel disoriented when you first enter this inner silence. You may mistake it for numbness, for a kind of emotional flatline. But what if it's actually stillness, not stagnation? What if it's the beginning of a spiritual rebalancing? According to Jung, repression creates shadow. Everything we push away, our grief, our anger, our unmet needs, our truth, doesn't disappear. It settles below the surface. And when we no longer spend our energy chasing intimacy or managing others' perceptions, we create a space wide enough for that shadow to rise. This rising often feels like confusion, fatigue, even disconnection. But it's not disconnection from life. It's disconnection from performance, from patterns, from pretending. And within that rupture, you start to see You start to notice how often you loved just to feel worthy, how often you spoke just to be heard, how often you touched just to be touched. This is not shame. This is awareness. This is the moment Jung described as holding the tension of opposites, standing at the edge of who you were while not yet being who you're becoming. And it begins with silence. There is a certain kind of woman who senses this shift. She doesn't always understand it at first. She only knows that something no longer feels natural about the game, the chase, the cycle of needing to be needed. And so she steps back. She stops responding, not out of bitterness, but because she no longer wants to be seen through filters that require her to shrink. Others may see this retreat as loneliness, as collapse. But what if it's a return to instinct, to intuition, to that wild inner space Jung referred to as the archetypal feminine, a realm where stillness is not absence, but power. In this space, the woman is no longer asking to be touched. She is asking to feel again, deeply, truthfully, from the center of herself. She is no longer performing intimacy, she is practicing integrity. And in that practice, something once lost begins to grow roots. So if you are in a season where your body has gone quiet, where you don't crave what you once did, where you feel less seen but somehow more real, you are not falling apart, you are falling inward. This is not a symptom to fix. This is a signal to follow, because silence, when chosen or even surrendered to, can become sacred. It can become the portal Jung spoke of, the threshold between who you have performed to be and who you truly are beneath the noise. It may not be comfortable, it may not feel like power, but it is presence, and presence is where transformation begins. You are not broken, you are becoming, and the silence you fear might be the voice of your soul, asking you to finally listen. Part 2. The silence of the body as a gateway to the inner world. There comes a moment when the external world begins to lose its grip, not all at once, but quietly, gradually. You find yourself no longer reacting to the same signals. The messages that once ignited anticipation now fall flat. The touch that once thrilled you now feels muted. You pause, unsure whether you're numb, or finally beginning to feel something different. Carl Jung observed that true psychological transformation often begins not with a decision, but with a disruption, a rupture in the familiar. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming begins with becoming, with stepping out of the roles, rhythms, and reflexes that no longer serve your soul. And this stepping out often begins in the body. When the body no longer craves what it used to, when desire softens, when sensuality grows still, modern culture rushes to pathologize it. You're disconnected. You've lost your spark. You need to get back out there. But what if the body's quiet is not dysfunction, but discernment? What if it's not fatigue, but filtration? In Jungian thought, the body and psyche are not separate. They are mirrors of each other. When the psyche grows overloaded, when the soul has carried too much noise, too many personas, too many false attachments, it often retreats inward, pulling the body with it. This retreat is not passive, it is preparatory. It is in this silence that the psyche begins to reorganize. Jung called this regression in service of the ego, a temporary withdrawal, not as failure, but as recalibration, a stepping back, so that something deeper can step forward. When a woman stops reaching outward and starts sinking inward, the body becomes more than skin, more than vessel. It becomes a compass. Its stillness begins pointing not toward others, but toward the unvisited rooms within herself. Desire, once outward and active, begins to reshape itself as curiosity, as reflection, as vision. She no longer asks, "Who desires me?" She begins to ask, "What do I desire that is not a reaction to being desired?" And that is where the real journey begins. The body, in its silence, opens the gate to the inner world, a realm Jung insisted was not fantasy but symbolically real. Within it lie dreams, memories, archetypes. Myths buried in the unconscious, waiting not just to be interpreted, but inhabited. You may find, in this space, a resurgence of dreams, vivid, strange, archetypal. You may feel waves of emotion that seem disconnected from the present moment, but deeply tied to forgotten chapters of your soul. Jung believed these moments are not random, but evidence that the psyche is speaking at last, freed from distraction, freed from noise. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And so, the silence of the body is not an ending, it is a revealing, a sacred interruption. Here, you begin to notice things you once dismissed, the subtle shift in energy around certain people, the discomfort of forced conversations, the way your heart contracts in rooms where you once performed affection. These are not mood swings, they are messages, and in the quiet, you can finally read them. The gateway of silence also breaks time apart. What once felt urgent, the need to answer, to respond, to fix, begins to feel unnecessary. You are no longer sprinting towards someone else's finish line. You are walking inward, barefoot, fully awake. This is not always romantic. Often, it is raw. The silence can bring ache, memories, grief. But grief is not the enemy of healing. Grief is the opening. Jung taught that suffering, if approached with awareness, becomes initiation. In that space, you begin to see your body not as broken, but as wise. It stopped not because it failed you, but because it remembered something you forgot, that you are more than your desirability, more than your responses, more than your ability to hold someone else's longing. In the absence of those distractions, your own longing emerges, not for someone, but for wholeness, for meaning, for truth. And it is through the gate of this silence that you begin to find it. Part 3. Meeting the shadow, the pain of awakening. Not all awakenings are beautiful. Some feel like unraveling, others feel like being split in two. When the body goes quiet and the soul begins to speak, what rises is not always light. Often, it's what you've spent years avoiding. Buried grief, unspoken rage, guilt, longing, self-betrayal. These are not intruders. They are residents of your inner world, long exiled, now returning home. Carl Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, the hidden, suppressed, and often denied aspects of the psyche. Not evil, not inherently dark, but simply unlived, repressed, excluded from the persona you've constructed to survive in the world. He wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego, personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. That effort begins when you stop performing, when you're no longer seducing, pleasing, adapting, when you finally pause and in the silence feel a discomfort you can't name. That discomfort is the shadow knocking. And here's the paradox. It often hurts more than any external heartbreak because it is not caused by someone else. It is the slow recognition of what you have done to yourself, what parts you've ignored to be accepted, what truths you've silenced to be loved. In this stage, you may feel fragmented. One part of you wants to grow, the other wants to run. One part is proud of your solitude, the other still mourns not being chosen. One part remembers your truth, the other grieves the version of you that was once adored, even if falsely. Jung insisted that true transformation requires holding this tension, not escaping it. There is no light without shadow, and no wholeness without imperfection, he wrote. Many people turn back at this point. The pain feels too raw. It's easier to return to performance, to distractions, to shallow intimacy that soothes but never nourishes. It's tempting to silence the soul again because what it reveals first is not clarity, but chaos. But if you stay, with the ache, with the ambiguity, you will begin to see the truth in that chaos. You will remember the moments when you said yes, but meant no. The nights when you stayed, when you should have left. the times you felt unworthy unless someone else was reaching for you. These are not regrets, they are revelations. This is the terrain of shadow work. Jung believed that the shadow, once acknowledged, becomes the gateway to authenticity. The more we resist it, the more it controls us from behind the curtain. But the more we face it, the more integrated and real we become. And integration is not perfection, it's wholeness. It means accepting that you can be wise and wounded, tender and guarded, sacred and still searching. When a woman reaches this stage, she often feels invisible to the world, but more visible to herself than ever. The gaze of others no longer defines her, but her own reflection finally feels honest. The shadow is not there to punish you. It's there to reintroduce you to the parts of yourself that were never broken, just buried. And while the process is painful, it is not cruel. Pain, here, is purification. It burns away what is false, what is performative, what no longer belongs. So if you find yourself crying for no clear reason, or grieving parts of yourself you barely remember, know this: you are not falling apart. You are falling into the center of yourself, into your shadow, and beyond it, into the light that only those who've walked through darkness can carry. Part 4. Awakening the archetypal feminine. The wild woman, anima, divine. Feminine. After the encounter with the shadow, something begins to stir, not loud, not sudden, but unmistakable. Beneath the pain, beneath the grief and the unraveling, a new presence emerges. Or perhaps, more truthfully, an ancient one returns. Carl Jung believed that deep within every individual lies a set of universal symbols and energies, the archetypes. These are not invented by us, they are inherited, timeless patterns of experience. And among the most potent of these is the anima, the feminine essence, not defined by gender, but by qualities of intuition, emotion, receptivity, and inner wisdom. When a woman ceases to define herself by how she is seen, when she no longer performs softness for approval or sensuality for attention, she creates space for the archetypal feminine to rise. This is not a return to fragility, it is a return to instinct. Jung's concept of the wild woman, though not named exactly in his writings, can be understood as a fusion of the anima and the instinctual self. She is untamed, not in the sense of rebellion, but in her refusal to be domesticated by external validation. She does not ask for permission to feel, to know, to become. In many women, this part has been silenced for decades, muted by roles, by expectations, by the hunger to be loved in ways that required self-abandonment. But when the body grows still and the psyche sheds its masks, the wild woman whispers. She does not seduce, she summons. She does not entertain, she embodies. She does not chase, she calls back her power. This awakening is not loud. It does not seek an audience. It is sacred, interior, sovereign, and because it cannot be commodified or controlled, it is deeply misunderstood. Jung taught that integrating the anima leads to psychic wholeness, a reunion between the conscious self and the unconscious feminine. In a woman, this process often unfolds as a radical reclamation of her own energy. She no longer leaks it into relationships that do not honor her. She no longer abandons herself to be chosen. She no longer edits her truth to fit someone else's story. Instead, she becomes the author. This doesn't mean she stops loving, quite the opposite. But her love now flows from overflow, not hunger, from clarity, not confusion, from grounded knowing, not emotional survival. She may find herself more quiet, but more rooted, less reactive, but more awake. She no longer needs to prove her worth through being wanted. Her worth is felt in her very presence. And those who meet her now, whether in friendship, love, or fleeting encounters, feel it, not as performance, but as power. A calm, magnetic power that comes from having touched one's own depths and not flinched. This is the divine feminine, not as an aesthetic, but as an energetic truth. It is not about being gentle all the time, It is about being true. True to one's cycles, one's silence, one's rage, one's softness. It is knowing that femininity is not a costume, but a current, an inner river that flows differently for each woman, but always toward authenticity. Jung believed that in every meaningful transformation, the psyche moves toward wholeness, and the return of the archetypal feminine is a necessary part of that integration. So, if you find yourself craving solitude instead of attention, if you find yourself drawn to quiet spaces instead of noise, if your body wants slowness, your mind seeks meaning, and your soul refuses to be rushed, you are not withdrawing. You are remembering. You are rewilding. The wild woman within you does not demand that you become someone else. She asks that you come back to yourself, unpolished, unedited, unafraid. And as she awakens, you will find that what once felt like absence is actually presence. What once felt like silence is guidance. What once felt like the end is the beginning of real power. You don't need to be chosen, because now you choose. Part 5. The quiet but powerful rise. She does not return with a bang. She does not need applause, nor does she seek recognition. The woman who has walked through silence, shadow, and soul does not emerge loudly, but she does emerge. And when she does, the world feels it. Not because she demands space, but because she is space. Carl Jung taught that the end of individuation is not becoming more of something, it's becoming whole, integrated, reconciled with what was once exiled. The woman who has met her shadow, who has reawakened her archetypal feminine, no longer lives in halves. She is no longer fragmented between who she is and who she is expected to be. She carries herself as one. And this terrifies the world. Because a woman who does not need to be chosen cannot be controlled. A woman who has reclaimed her longing from external validation and anchored it in self-trust is no longer swayed by shallow praise or conditional affection. She sees through performance. She hears the silent subtext in others' words. She feels what is real and what is rehearsed. This does not make her hard. It makes her clear. Clarity, after all, is a form of love, just not the kind we're taught to romanticize. The woman who rises from inner stillness does not rise for revenge or recognition. She rises because there is nowhere left to hide. She has sat in the ashes. She has walked through the ache. She has touched the quiet truth of her own worth, not handed to her by a lover or a title, but uncovered in the fire of transformation. And now she leads not loudly, but through example. She no longer reaches for people who drain her. She no longer waters connections that don't root in mutual depth. She no longer performs nice at the expense of true. Instead, she moves with discernment. She speaks when it matters. She loves with intention. And when she is silent, it is not because she is unsure, it is because she knows exactly where her energy belongs. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This is that privilege realized. What once was a woman looking outward for approval is now a woman looking inward for alignment. What once was a girl afraid to be alone is now a soul at home within herself. There are no fireworks in this return, only presence. There is no final speech, only rhythm. The rhythm of a woman who no longer rushes because she knows nothing real will pass her by. This is not a fantasy arc. This is not an escape. This is embodiment. Embodiment of all she's reclaimed. Her voice, her knowing, her timing, her silence, her sensuality, her soul. She does not need to broadcast her growth. The way she breathes, the way she sets boundaries, the way she chooses, that is the evidence. She has made peace with her past. She no longer runs from the old pain, nor chases old highs. She has seen herself in the mirror of silence and did not flinch. And now, she becomes something rare, not invulnerable, but unshakable. She walks differently, speaks differently, not because she learned how to impress, but because she remembered how to inhabit. This is the quiet rise. It does not beg, it does not shrink, It does not strive. It simply becomes. And in this becoming, she offers others the permission to do the same, not through advice but through frequency. Her very presence is an invitation, a message without words. Come home to yourself. Because in the end, the most powerful transformation is not in being admired, but in being at peace. And the woman who has walked through silence, who has faced herself in the dark, does not just survive. She returns to the world not to be seen, but to see. Not to be chosen, but to choose. Not to belong, but to belong to herself. And that is what true power feels like. Silence is not the absence of life. It is the return to what is most alive within us. This journey, from the quieting of the body to the awakening of the soul, from the confrontation with shadow to the embodiment of the feminine archetype, is not linear, not clean, not easy. But it is real, it is sacred, and it is necessary. Carl Jung believed that what we do not make conscious comes back to us as fate. For many women, fate has looked like repetition, repeating wounds, patterns, longings that never find rest. But when the silence comes, and they dare to stay in it rather than flee from it, the cycle breaks. Not with violence, but with awareness. In that awareness, something once fragmented begins to stitch itself back together. She who once needed to be desired now listens for her own longing. She who once feared being alone now walks with her soul as her closest companion. She who once gave away her power to be seen now becomes a mirror for others to see themselves. This is not empowerment as the world defines it. This is sovereignty, rooted, quiet, steady. A woman not looking to be saved, but having saved herself. And the world may not understand it, because she does not shout, she does not chase, she does not bend, she simply is. And in being, fully, deeply, without apology, she awakens others, not through persuasion, but through presence. So if you find yourself in a moment of stillness, unsure of who you are, without the noise, without the roles, without the constant reaching, know this: you are not lost. You are being returned to yourself. And in that return, you rise, without sound, but with unshakable truth. That is the soul's voice. That is the work of becoming whole. That is the gift of the silence you once feared.